So today we've got we're going to be talking about leveraging the power of community, and we've got a couple of people who run communities, but I also want to sort of talk about community a little bit more broadly. So I'm going to introduce them, but I'm sure they'll do a better job of introducing themselves. So we've got Timothy. I was going to attempt the surname, Tim, but I'm gonna let you do it yourself before I embarrass myself. So let me add you in. So you head up, you're head of Upworld. So tell us a little bit about Upworld.
Yeah, so Upworld is it's kind of a group of mini businesses, I guess, but the community part of it is called Up Club, and it's a community of 1,100 startup marketers and founders in startup businesses. And it's kind of centered around a Slack, but in real life, online events. We've got a mentor matching program, and people pay a monthly fee to be part of it. And then we also have a recruitment. The Upworld has got recruitment business and courses, and we run a festival this year as well. But yeah, everything for startup marketers essentially is what we do.
Amazing. Great to have you here. And then I'm also joined by Jody and Richard, so I'll just bring them onto it. So Jody's and Richard, the founder of BD100. Jody works at the Propeller Group, where he's responsible across PR, content, and BD. And the guy set up the BD100. Is it? I'll add you there. Was it 3 years ago now, or remind me? 4 years?
No, we've had 5 years. This is our sixth coming into it. So time flies when you're having fun. So, and our background, well, I guess, I mean, my background's been doing new business development for the last 20 years. Obviously, I had a BD agency that became part of the Propeller Group. Recently been part of the MBO at Propeller to sort of drive forward with an offer of bringing together PR, business development, and content. I think, Adam, we've worked together over the years in different shapes and guises. Back in the upfront days, I remember starting your career in BD, and I guess from that involvement and being in business development and working with lots of great business developers, that led Rich and I to sort of launch the BD100 to bring sort of both recognition to a profession, but also bring a community together. So that was very much the driving force of that, and great to have Rich on board for this call as well, so we can share some of the thinking behind that.
Yeah, perfect. So yeah, I guess, and Rich, jump in when you want. I think I wanted to look at community today, but I think community is such an interesting sort of word and place, and I think often when we're working for our clients and building business development campaigns, we often approach them with a sense of community. So even though they're not all running community businesses with subscriptions, I think trying to generate a sense of community among your audience and how you engage with them is really important and might change the way you interact with those people. So I want to think about community a little bit in a sense of just as a marketing tool, how can people do that? But Tim, if we start with you, I mean, I know Upworld's come from Copy Club, and I've heard a lot about it. I've not been a member myself, but why did the community kind of start? What was the sort of gap that it solved to begin with?
Yeah, so the starting point was actually, so Lottie is the founder, and she was working at Procter & Gamble at the time, and then decided she didn't want to follow the corporate marketing path, and she moved over to Propercorn, which is now doing pretty well, but at the time was a really pretty small business. So she joined as their head of marketing, and very quickly felt isolated and lacking, the support network of P&G, and realized how much she didn't know. So she started it with just dinners. It was just her and other people who were also in other startups sharing ideas, challenges. It was called Copy Club because it was based on something they used to do at P&G, which is around bringing their favorite ad campaigns and discussing them and talking about what they could learn. So the business I think that the business actually was kind of begun properly maybe 4 years ago. But for a long time, it was just dinners that were happening. And then it evolved into a mailing list where people were kind of on the waiting list to come to these dinners. And then it grew out of there. And then, eventually Lottie switched over from working client side and set up the business when it could kind of sustain itself, and it's grown from there.
So it sounds like it was very much more organic. It wasn't necessarily planned. It was like a true
Yeah.
thing that brought people together that they loved, and then naturally that grew over time.
Yeah, I mean, so it basically started because Lottie wanted to solve her own problem. So it wasn't kind of spotting a gap. Well, it was spotting a gap, but it was her gap, and it wasn't set up as a business originally. But then it kept on growing, and clearly lots of other people had the same problems and same challenges, and it's just kind of gone from strength to strength.
Yeah. So I guess thinking about that, then I don't know, Jody, Rich, like the BD 100. What made you set it up? You know, what gap did it solve before it came around?
Well, I think we had, I guess, sort of working in new business over the years. You know, sometimes it can be a sort of, let's say, a lonely job, but you're sort of left to get on with it in many agencies. And also you can be a little bit disconnected from the highs and lows of the agency. You can be doing the work on winning the clients, or sometimes doing everything but not quite winning clients. You've got your own timelines that you're working to, and then the agency gets busy actually delivering the work and generally getting the recognition for doing that work, you know, whether it's going on to win awards at Cannes, or whether it's, you know, just being high profile clients you're working with. But often you sort of forget where that lead originally came from a new business perspective. So partly it was about sort of just creating some recognition for a job that has a lot of highs and lows. But also I think Rich and I worked together sort of in the early days. Rich was one of my first clients when you were over at the bank, and we used to just, when we stopped sort of working together in that particular context, we still used to get together and just chat sort of experiences around BD and sort of insights and best practice and tips. And we used to typically do that, well, in a pub. And then one night when we were doing it in a pub, we thought, well, it's useful for us, maybe it'd be useful for others. So it was very much that sort of bringing people together to share ideas and tips and experiences, or sometimes just the struggles or challenges you might be having, just to bounce off someone. So that was very much where we came from with it, and just thought, well, I guess we did make the decision to just do it and make it happen, because we just felt there was a big gap there to support others in our industry.
And how did you go about launching that then? You know, in terms of what was the final point, and then how did it sort of come to market?
Well, I guess sort of one of the first things, because I guess the awards, having a sort of BD 100 list, the recognition point gave a nice focal point for it. As I said, there was a wider objective for us, which was to bring the community together and get people sort of networking, talking to you. To be honest, today's a great representation of that, you know, business developers and anyone involved in new business coming together to share thinking and experiences. But we also wanted to use the awards part as a sort of real focal point. So after we'd had the idea and came up with the sort of decision to make it happen, we just picked up the phone to the drum and said, look, this is an idea we've got. We feel that business developers are sort of underrepresented, under-recognized in our industry. Unfortunately, when we spoke to initially a guy called Fergus over there, but then Diane and Gordon, they agreed. So that they felt, yeah, actually we should be putting more focus on business development, business developers. So that they sort of partnered with us for the awards, and that gave us a real focal point and a media partner to really amplify it, which gave us some really good momentum to then build the community in those early days.
Yeah, but I guess both communities started from a place of real sort of need, right? That wasn't there before, and genuinely wanting to sort of help people rather than sort of, you know, from a commercial standpoint, you know, of what's in it for me, which I think is kind of where communities can maybe go wrong. I think like with Tim with Upworld, I mean, I'm not sure about how it launched, but in terms of the sort of long-term vision of the community, I mean, it's obviously moved on from what it was. How do you sort of, I mean, maybe maintain some of that authenticity and trueness to the original brand, and sort of giving back to the community, as well as operating, you know, as a profitable enterprise?
Yeah, so I think I'm actually really lucky in that often I'm on a lot of community forums, as you know, communities for community people as well. And the biggest challenge that comes up is generally people struggling to show the value to the business, and the tension that arises with kind of serving the community, but also delivering that return. Our entire business is built around the community. So it's a revenue stream, and then also out of that we find jobs for people. So we've got recruitment offering, and we kind of provide learning opportunities with the courses. So I'm in quite a fortunate position there, where there's not too much tension between the kind of profitable element of it and putting our members first and foremost. Because the way that we grow generally is word of mouth, and that comes from people having a great experience. So we're kind of deeply invested in making sure we deliver a brilliant experience. I think with scaling comes inevitable challenges. So often scaling is kind of at odds with a good community experience. And certainly, we've seen examples of that with the Slack community, and we've looked at different tools. If anyone wants to talk about tools later, we can do, but we've looked at various different tools. For us, Slack makes sense because people are already, our audience is already there. But as the bigger it gets, the more overwhelming it becomes. So actually, it's about how do we create a feeling of sub communities. And I can't remember which, there is a community book that talks about temples, and essentially people feeling part of wherever they might have different needs, so they have to feel part of these smaller temples or sub communities, and meeting those needs. So for us, that's about getting our expansion is often led by members. So we've just kind of started moving into Bristol a bit more, and Manchester, because we've got some super members on the ground there who are really passionate about building their own, their own network. So their objectives are aligned. So I think it's about really keeping the experience front and center, and making sure that you're never compromising the members for the sake of the commercial gain.
Yeah, that's interesting. And thinking about their needs, and sort of letting them be a part of it, letting them sort of drive it a little bit, because that's what a community is. And also when is a community too big, or it needs sub communities to a certain extent. What other sort of challenges have you seen throughout that sort of scaling journey of just driving a community? Because I do it myself for BD Matters, and I see the level. It needs a lot of investment in terms of sort of time, and it's quite content heavy. And you want those natural conversations and word of mouth to happen. But was there a point where it wasn't happening, or how did you encourage that to happen more so the community sort of took on a life of its own?
Yeah, I think I've learned a lot about community over the last few years, and it's a real mixture of art and science. Also, at the end of the day, it's a big group of people, and people are complicated, and they all have their own different needs. And I think one of the, we get an example being people asking for new Slack channels all the time, right? So people say, "Oh, I'd love this mini community where we can talk about this topic," and we'll do it, and then it'll be completely like people don't, you see it in marketing as well, but people don't say what they don't necessarily know what they want, and they don't always do what they say they're going to do. So it's about, and then you've got to really model the behavior for quite a long time, and it's about being patient. There's not really any quick wins. I think when it comes to community building, you've got to, if you're going to launch something new. So we started like a coffee morning thing, and probably for the first 8 weeks 2 people came, and it's about sort of modeling, just talking about it, being patient, knowing that you've got to establish the ritual, and that people kind of get used to that, and then it will gradually grow. Or if it doesn't, then you bin it off, and that's fine. You move on. So it's about listening to people, but also trying to pick out the key insight rather than just reacting to what you say, because otherwise you can spread everything too thinly, and then nothing gets engagement. And you've got to have that critical mass of engagement, otherwise people very quickly lose interest. So our main Ask the Community channel on Slack, I'm very hot with my community managers on making sure someone either gets a response, or they get connected to someone who might be able to help them. Because the moment that someone comes out the back, there's a lot of lurkers in community who just love getting kind of knowledge from it, and that's a really valuable part of the community. But if someone actually takes the step to ask a question, if they don't get something, they'll switch off, and that'll be it. So it's about kind of identifying the key there's something called the commitment curve, which in communities is about getting people more and more invested as you go along, and you've got to do quite a lot of hand holding, and you, like you say, it's quite time intensive. There's no easy wins there.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So there's obviously lots of things you're trialing, and I guess there can sometimes be a desire to maybe spread yourself too thin because it's community, right? There's so much you can do, and conversations kind of sprawl everywhere. But like you said, that point of gravity, like you said, you've got to get the momentum and commitment. Guys, with the BD 100, then, like, what were there similar kind of challenges, or obviously, I feel like you guys, from what I know of it, have kept it quite focused. Is that on purpose, or have there been challenges around trying to get people to participate in it, or have you been distracted by other things or tempted to go down other avenues?
Do you want to jump in there, Rich?
You're on mute, Rich.
I mean, I would say, right, if you look at what's at the heart of the BD 100, it's about celebration, recognition, and the individual. I think what Jody and I aligned on when we had that pint sort of 6.5 years ago was, we as people that are in business development, there was nothing that celebrated the individual for the hard work that they do in that role. Often the creative accolades are going to those that end up delivering the creative work, when the business developer might have actually been equally creative and hardworking at the origins of that relationship, sometimes years before a project has actually been realized. So I think if you think about recognition and celebration and the personality of the individual being at the heart of the BD 100, that's why it's core to light, and why it perhaps, I totally hear what Tim's saying about, that trial and error of certain aspects of a community. And sometimes you try something and it's just like a dead zone. And I've been in other communities where that's happened. And, the BD 100 is not without its challenges. I guess the biggest challenge for us is that, we started this, both of us not going into it by dropping everything else that we were doing. We did it as a passion project. So it's a community that's been driven by our own passion. And so we're sort of trying to keep it, we're trying to build it and grow it whilst we're both still doing our day job. So there's a slightly different challenge there to the one that I guess Tim has. But yeah, it's about recognition and celebration. So it's sort of taken off on its own, and it definitely is gathering momentum year on year, which is nice.
I think certainly that you mentioned, obviously, it's for both of us to a certain extent moonlighting or a side project to our core day-to-day jobs. But the good thing is it's complementary. So ultimately our focus in our sort of day-to-day career is around business development. So it's aligned with that. If we were doing something completely different, it would probably be tougher. But ultimately, sort of by being able to bring that together, and I think we've seen it for working with our clients, creating some kind of community around the area that you specialize in is a great way of making new sort of connections, and it's a great way, I think, of doing new business. Actually, just being able to create way of starting relationships with people in a more sort of subtle and balanced way, rather than just launching into a sales pitch. So I think it's a key part for agencies to build relationships and new business opportunities. And I think sort of what we've just tried to do year by year is just get ideas, keep talking to people, get suggestions, look at how we can keep developing it, and I think plugging in relevant partners. I think the key thing we looked at was, let's make sure it's sort of inclusive to everyone in our industry, and let's make sure we can get different partners involved, things like BD Matters, working hand in hand to sort of say, well, how can we push our profession and our industry forward? We've looked at sort of what are the key topics, whether it's sort of talk about the pressures of new business, whether there's stuff around mental health that we can be doing to support people. That's been a big focus of some of the events we've done. Just trying to look at, really, how can we not just celebrate and recognize, but actually just support the community, and constantly looking at just how we can push that forward, and sort of help solve as many of the challenges, or at least contribute towards that, as a sort of connection of companies and partners and people, to really just keep pushing us forward together.
Yeah, I think like with anything, any good marketing, it's all about them, right? I think, and that's the key that's coming through from what you're both sharing and the passions around it. It's about helping people, giving back, and giving them the platform to alleviate whatever problems they might be having. Unless you're doing that, you're not really connected with them, and that's why I think, like you said, Jody, it's subtle, but I think it's a really effective marketing tactic and business development tactic, because you're not selling, you're just giving them the platform, you're just putting them in a place where they can talk about their problems, or connecting them to people who have similar problems or feel similarly to them, and enabling that conversation and facilitating it to happen. And that's the beauty of bringing it together. I'm just thinking, like, through growing, has there been elements, either on your side, Tim, or with the BD100, is like unique benefits like you weren't expecting as things come out of it, that sort of it wasn't intended to do, or solve or be a part of, but it kind of has naturally taken on a different direction to that what was planned?
I mean, I guess from our perspective, the whole business came out of that. So it was never meant to be, it was never designed as a business. It was just people going for dinner, and then that grew. The list, the Lottie's mailing list grew, and then I think the first kind of revenue stream was from recruitment. So people, because there was such a good network of marketers working in startups, inevitably people would come to Lottie and say, can you recommend anyone for this brand manager job, or I'm looking for head of marketing. So that was the first unexpected benefit that came from it. And then as it grew bigger, we got stuff like sponsorship, people asking us about sponsorship, because we've got a really incredibly engaged group of marketers that are kind of really attractive to loads of B2B companies who want to talk to that exact audience. So the whole business has come out of it, really. And then we started charging a membership fee once we got to a point where we felt like we had a strong enough proposition that we were offering enough value, and could therefore reinvest the money that people give us into community management, and making sure that it still stays a thriving community. And also we've got another part of the business called Brand Hackers, which is our like fractional marketing consultancy team, where we put people into businesses, to startups, when they're not ready to take on perm headcount. And again, that gave us a great network from the community that we could meet people, pull people out from. Lottie's profile started building. She got asked to do talks. And so, yeah, the whole business has really spun out. We're 20 people now, and it's all come from just starting a group of, starting a bunch of people sitting around a dinner table talking about their problems and how they can help each other.
So how many people in the community, out of interest?
So we've got 1,100 in the paid community, and then a wider, I'd say, following of around 50,000, something like that. We've got the newsletter and stuff. But yeah, the peer, when I talk about community, I think of it as where people have one-to-one relationships. It's not a fan base. It's people who are actually building connections with each other. And one of the stats that I look at for the health of our community, it's a hard one to there's no one stat, but the number of messages on Slack that get sent in private versus public is quite a useful metric that I keep an eye on. So I've got no idea what people are saying, obviously, because they're private conversations, but I know that 3/4 of the messages are actually sent privately between members rather than in the public forum. So that's kind of a really healthy sign.
Yeah, and I guess that's showing their engagement, but I guess it's showing their value, the value they're getting from one another. And is that what's so key to it? It's the peer-to-peer part of it, that you don't necessarily have to even do much from a sort of top perspective. It's just the community almost feeds the community.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think we do a lot to maintain the right environment for that, but ultimately we're not the ones sitting at the top teaching. If everyone else stopped talking to each other, we'd have nothing. So it's very much like our whole business is built on knowledge sharing between people. And so we're very, very protective of the community and making sure that it feels like a safe space, and that people want to keep coming and helping each other out and talking to each other, because it's absolutely the value exchange between people rather than us to them that drives the health of the community.
And is it events that are the main kind of driver in all of this, you know, whether that be online or physical events, as well? You obviously mentioned the Slack channel, but is that the main kind of way that the community engages?
I think the Slack is probably the heart of it. It's incredibly active, incredibly active. It tends to be more transactional questions on Slack, so the deeper relationships are built either in one-to-one messages or at online and in real life events. And we do like breakfast meetings for once a month in one of our spaces in London, but we also do online huddles where we have 10 people talking about a specific topic, kind of similar to this, but we do 2 a week of those where we often spot trending topics in the community, and then we'll turn that into okay, we've got people who are interested in talking more about, what's the best way to source micro influencers for an influencer marketing campaign. We're going to do a quick huddle on that. So it's when we ask people get value from different parts of it. So we also have a black book of freelancers. For some, that's the most valuable part. It really changes depending on what your need state is, and we kind of try to not diversify too much, but also accept that people are going to find value in different parts of the community at different times in their career stages.
Yeah, it must be hard to keep, I suppose, everybody happy. And I mean, with the BD 100, how do you guys sort of decide on topics and sort of, you talked about different things like, mental health or whatever it might be, but is there an element of like listening to the community and understanding sort of what they're going through? How does that sort of work?
Yeah, that comes up a lot. I guess we've had, you talked about sort of how it's developed and things that were expected and unexpected. I think, we had the opportunity, I guess, over sort of COVID when suddenly the in-person event got, we had to cancel that, but then we had the opportunity to do an online conference which brought together lots more people than we're expecting. So it sort of went well beyond new business people. We had some brilliant agency leaders. We had people like Sherilyn Shackle, who sort of heads up the Marketing Society. We had brands coming on, giving their sort of perspectives as well. And just by doing that, it took the agenda in a number of different directions. And I guess some of that was by the people that wanted to get involved would help shape some of the topics. And then just from, I guess, regularly talking to the community and sort of different people within that, we've got WhatsApp group that will sort of regularly put things out there to particularly our highly engaged members and those that have been in the BD 100 sort of multiple times. We've got some people that really do like to get involved and share sort of insights on that. So we're always trying to look at what are the hot topics, and we're always trying to get a sense from some of the key sort of community members, what are the things you want to hear about. So yeah, I think going online gave us that extra opportunity to develop it. And then when we went back in person, we wanted to level it up again. So we then had the interesting opportunity to partner with Alf, because they sponsored a previous event, and then thought, well, actually, we want to go bigger on this and celebrate even more sort of categories and awards for marketing, new business across agencies and media. And so again, it gave us an opportunity to go to a bigger stage as well in person this time. But I think, yeah, a lot of it, the themes that we try and cover is sort of generally from our members. What do they want to hear about? What are the key topics, as well as the age-old stuff you always get within new business and business development, whether it's around the pitch process or sort of best practice, some learning as well, because I think it's a profession that, I said, often people are left to get along with it, and I think this is why having things like BD Matters, where you've got sort of tips and experience and just there is a need for training and development for people as well. So it's a tough job that ultimately they're often, well, historically we found there wasn't really a handbook for a lot of people in the role. So developing that learning, I think, is a key part as well.
Well, it's always changing as well. I think that's the thing, and technology is transforming the role, and so many other factors as well. And in terms of the platforms, then you guys mentioned you sort of talked about Slack and WhatsApp and things like that. Just how did you go about deciding what are the best platforms to use? I mean, I remember LinkedIn groups, and I think we've still got one, but I can tell you now the engagement is very, very little, and that's being generous. So it's there are obviously some platforms that are working, some aren't. Tim, what have you seen work on? You said Slack's obviously been great. Is there anything else that sort of brings people together?
For us, it's Slack right now is definitely the right choice. So we started on WhatsApp. It became quite difficult as it got bigger. If you've got 1,100 people in a WhatsApp, I don't even know what the limit is. You probably can't do that, but 1,100 people in a WhatsApp group is obviously going to start to feel very overwhelming, and you can't kind of organize by threads and that sort of stuff. So we then move, although we do still have some smaller WhatsApp groups for kind of sub communities within the community, which are sort of unofficial channels, I guess. But we also then had a forum based platform, which was, I think it was kind of, I can't remember what the actual platform was. There are lots of new ones out there. But we then made the shift onto Slack because that's where people were already spending their time. So trying to get people to change behavior. I've seen some really lovely community platforms out there, but if people don't go onto them, they're useless. So it's like you can have it doesn't matter how good your UI is. If you're trying to change behavior, it's really, really difficult. And if you're trying to get someone into the routine of visiting somewhere that they're not going every day anyway, that's a much bigger ask than someone who's logging into Slack for us, which loads of our, most of our audience use it in their business. And then we're just an extra community in there. So I think it's about understanding. I think, stuff like Discord can work really, really well for some people. For us, it's not the right one, but it's about understanding where your community is spending their time. Just like with any other marketing, where do they spend their time, and then how can you slot into that in a seamless way to make it as easy as possible to get people engaging with the community as much as you can.
Yeah, mate. So we tried Mighty Networks for a time period, and again, it seemed more style over substance, I think, was the general feel.
Yeah, like really nice platform, but you got to get people there.
Yeah, exactly. And they think they tried to create that with the app and everything, but it just felt, like you said, it wasn't natural. I mean, with the BD100, is there? Have you, you said WhatsApp sort of is that working quite well for you guys? Have you tried anything else in that regard?
Well, I think, I mean, the beginnings of it were all about celebrating together. So it was all about, the live event. And as Jody said, when we couldn't get together, we did a longer form all-day conference that brought other themes in and other topics that people could explore that was helpful. I think the one thing that came out of that was culture. And that now really helps with the partnership with Alf Insight, because one of those awards is celebrating agency culture. So the culture aspect has been, for me, a sort of a natural but nice add-on to where we began. And I think business developers are now driving agency culture. But in terms of platforms, it's, as Tim said, you've got to, and as Jody said before, we're living day to day what our members or those within the BD100 community are living themselves. So you basically put the platforms together that you're on yourself. So we all live and breathe LinkedIn day to day, but perhaps not so much of the groups. Everyone within our community is themselves doing their trade of business development within their agency or as a consultant. So they've got their own channels that are taking their time away. So hence, WhatsApp was probably the best one for us with our more highly engaged members of the community on quite a small level. So as it grows, we'll have to see. I use Slack with my clients, but there's only so many platforms that we can spend our time on, right?
Yeah, well, we're all vying for that attention, right, all the time. And I think that's one thing I found about, like, with community is people just finding the time to be a part of that community. There has to be that value exchange that we're always very top of mind thinking about that. What's the value exchange of someone investing financially? What are they getting out of it? And maybe what they're not getting elsewhere, because it's like, even in like the agency space that we know, it feels like it's becoming more and more of a crowded space, at the moment, with lots of different communities kind of spiraling up, and just feels like that's a direction that more people are headed in. I mean, do you think that should all businesses be focused on forming some sort of community, whether or not we're talking about like a physical community like Upworld and BD100, but is there a sense that anybody could do this?
I think that I guess obviously there'll be different drivers for it. If you wouldn't recommend it for everyone in terms of scaling up as a business, because I think there can be, particularly if it's going down sort of creating a paid membership, it's a hard slog. Obviously, it sounds like it's been well achieved, Tim, for yourself, but it's one that it's not an easy job, to sort of start a platform from scratch and sell membership. There's some sort of big investment that can be needed in that, both in time and funding. But I think so. If you look at the sort of the broad category of community, I think for me, it is sort of being involved with most of the new business programs we develop for clients. I think trying to get away from that sort of one directional sales approach, just bringing people together around key topics and challenges, for me is a far better way to connect with. If you're looking at an agency trying to engage with marketing directors, talk about the topics that are sort of top of their mind, come together as a two-way conversation rather than you pitching them. And there's so many different ways you can do it. So whether you count a community as sort of running regular events or sharing content on social, we found that we've been able to get sort of what are effectively prospective clients contributing to reports, getting involved in panel events, and it's just a much sort of more effective way of building the relationship. So in that way, you are starting to build a community, but it's not necessarily sort of having to be a scalable business. It's more just a way of bringing people together, starting conversations and starting relationships. And I think if you can start to build some routine into that, it can be a very effective approach to new business.
Yeah, as we see that all the time, sort of top of funnel, and you've got to be in the conversation to start with. I don't know if you guys got anything to add to that at all.
I was just before I came on this, I just looked at we all probably could have a good stab at what community means, but it's about people in a shared place or with shared attitudes. Simple as that. So we're in communities all the time, right? So it's, as Jody said, it's whether you decide to build that out into a business, or you just take the essence of what community is and make it work for you.
Yeah, exactly. I think it can be quite powerful, but I think it's a change in the mindset when you're selling to thinking, oh, hold on, how do I facilitate a community and not sell?
I think that's the interesting thing, because I think those that have come into the BD100, I don't know, it's sort of swollen their confidence in terms of what the role actually does. And I think we have seen in the 6 years since we started it, this transition of just, business development manager, new business person. It's now like head of growth, and growth is encompassing business development, aspects of culture. I think we're seeing a real shift in agency land, in big agencies, smaller independent agencies, etc., where it's bringing in a whole lot more. And I'd like to think that in some small way, we've done something to sort of, increase the power of the role.
Yeah. I'm sure you've given them that platform, isn't it? And it's, as you said, it's that recognition. It's got to start somewhere. And so, like with Tim, with Upworld, how are you kind of acquiring new customers? How do you kind of go about? You mentioned this investment from sponsorship and things like that, but how do you go to continue to expand the current membership?
Yes, so most of our growth comes from referrals. We've played around with different acquisition channels before, but I think communities, and paid community is an interesting one, because there's no purchase trigger in the way that there is for some other things that you pay for. So you don't suddenly go, oh, I need to join a paid community today. Like, you start to, you identify there's the needs underlying, and then a lot of people talk about after they've joined us, they say, oh, I wish we'd found you sooner. So it's kind of like, it's not a clear point where you go, yeah, you don't go on and you don't have a consideration set where you're like, oh, I'm going to go and look at the different paid communities out there generally. So most of our stuff comes from referral and LinkedIn. So Lottie, our founder's got 20,000 followers on LinkedIn. She's very active. A few of us have got moderate followings on there as well. And it's about building. So whenever I ask, if I look at our attribution for new members, Google Analytics will tell me that it's 90% direct an organic search. But in reality, it's because people have seen 20 posts on LinkedIn, they've come to one of our online events, and then they've spoken to someone else who's in the community who's recommended that they join. And at some point, there'll be something that pushes them over the edge to go, okay, now I feel like it's worth me making the investment and trying it out for myself. So we've kind of done some paid ads and stuff. It doesn't really, it's too complex to sell for us to just go, hey, you should join this community right now. So we rely on building up the kind of awareness through lots of different touch points. And then, ultimately it often comes from someone saying from in the community going, you absolutely should do this. So it's mainly referral driven.
Yeah, so they've kind of had to recognize that in themselves. And what do you find are the key motivators for why people do join?
Again, it varies, but for some it's more transactional, like they want a network of freelancers. So it's quite hard I've done it before. If you ever put a post out on LinkedIn asking for freelancers, you get about 700 responses, of which 0.1% are useful. So it's kind of like a broad enough but more closed network of being able to get someone very quickly is for some. Some feel lonely, like there's a lot of people just feel quite lonely, and they're missing, they're in a marketing team of one or two, or they're a freelancer, they just miss having a team around them. So it's that sense of shared challenges. There's a bit of imposter syndrome in most of us, I think, and we kind of try to rail against that performative culture on LinkedIn as well, where it can feel like everyone else is smashing it and you're not. So there's that kind of it's a confidence builder. We've got mentor matching, so actually finding a mentor can be quite challenging, although people know that it's very, very beneficial once they do it. So and then jobs is another way in for people. So there's kind of lots of different routes in. Once people get in, the overriding feeling is a feeling of support, having a support network around you, but you don't normally sign up for a support network. It's normally something else that brings you in, and then you kind of get that revelation once you're inside.
Yeah, it's interesting. We've seen something similar, but I suppose also thinking about some of the things you mentioned there, they've all kind of like, it might be a telling time of why now is such an important time, why communities are doing so well, because you're thinking about the impacts of social media, imposter syndrome, the pressures of that constantly, COVID that happened, which all made us feel very isolated, but literally physically and mentally. And then the sort of freelancer gig economy blowing up and everyone sort of becoming their own business, and one-man bands are going out there or one-woman bands doing their own thing. So I think there's a lot of people out there like probably feeling maybe they don't have a sense of belonging and looking for something like like Upworld or BD Matters or BD 100 and thinking like where do I belong? I don't know if any of that's come through. Obviously, Jody, you said COVID was a bit of an inflection point with the events, and I think events seem to be back, right, and bringing people together seem to be sort of more important. So is that going to continue to be a big part of the growth of BD 100?
Yeah, definitely. And I think we sort of mentioned always looking to try and sort of keep thinking, how can we keep developing this? I think that whole sense of belonging and sort of bringing people together, and we've tried to encourage this with getting people involved in the events, both attending but also sort of speaking on panels, obviously those winning the awards, is just to give people that sense of belonging. I think that's a really key sort of element to what we do. I think sort of going back to the COVID days, I remember we spun up pretty quickly and sort of a weekly event that was just getting people together just to see each other on screens, really, and we kept it quite lighthearted. We had a guy called Ali Woods, who was a part-time comedian. He's now a full-time comedian, but we got him to host it and just tried to have a bit of fun with it. And we didn't try and create too much of a polished experience. It was, look, people just need to be seeing each other, having a laugh, and trying to come together. So I think, mentioned we're getting people working, even though we are coming back to the offices for some businesses, or at least some days a week, there is still a lot of people working from home, and just good to get FaceTime with others. So I think we're constantly looking at other ways we can do that. But obviously, big live events are back and sort of very much sort of getting well attended with what we're doing, but in different formats. So we have the big awards event, so that's coming up in early May, which will be sort of bringing everyone together for more of a celebration and more fun. But we are also sort of running, I mean, we did drinks the other week, just to get the community together. We'll be looking at doing different panel sessions, different meetups, roundtables. I think there's a whole variety of formats that people are just keen to get together and just share experiences. So as much as you've got all the tools online that can help you with the comms, I think, yeah, you can't really beat the FaceTime, whether it's in person or even something like this.
Yeah, I think people are craving that, and I was going to ask about the sort of long-term vision of both communities, but at the same time, is that sort of hard to do, given that the communities are kind of naturally growing in their own regard, and both started not without a complete vision, certainly a direction they wanted to go in. You could say that BD100 has somewhat achieved the vision, but then I'm sure it wants to go further, and then Upworld, obviously, it's taken on a new course. So I don't know, is there a sort of further vision that you've got in mind of where you want to take it? Either.
There's a few ideas. I was going to let Rich jump in with one, because I know he's got a couple of inspirations and thoughts that he's been harboring for a while for BD100. But you're right, to a certain extent, we achieved a lot of what we initially set out to do. And the more sort of communities, the more groups, and more sort of BD focused things we see, whether it's events. I think there's a growth conference coming up. There's sort of, every time we see something like that, we think, great, the more stuff there, that we can support, hopefully help to enable, for us, is a good thing. But I know, there's probably a couple of ideas that Rich, you sort of excited about in terms of our future.
I never know whether I'm supposed to keep just being new or actually put them out there. But I mean, okay, there's a certain nationality flag following the BD100, Jody, isn't there? That I've always thought that the BD100 USA sounded quite good. And therefore, if the BD100 USA is one and BD100 APAC is another, then, why the hell can't we have, the best regional business developers, and then there'd be the BD100 global face-off. That would allow us to have the best business developer on the planet.
Well, that's an exclusive. It's got to happen now, Rich.
Well, the thing is, the reason why Jody and I work perfectly together is because I have these ideas, and then he sort of puts the sensible face on it, and then we normally end up somewhere perfectly in the middle. So we'll see. But right now, I'm really happy with where it's going, and the fact that it's, the BD100 is now being celebrated within a bigger community on a bigger stage with the Alpha Wars, which are on May the 1st next year. That to me is real progress, and I couldn't have done it without Jody's sort of more commercial mind than mine, sort of shaping it as we've gone through. So it's great.
And maybe, I don't know, Tim, you talked about regionality, and you said Bristol you were looking to sort of move into. So what, maybe to help these guys out, what's been the thought around regionality and the challenges around that, or opportunities around that?
Yeah, so we've had to kind of restrain ourselves from trying to go too fast too quickly. And I think really the opportunity so I've got team members in Bristol and in Manchester, which is kind of a key part of it, because it's really difficult initially, we've found, to get stuff off the ground without someone locally driving it. So you can work with members, but for us it's been, we've done events in like America, we've done some dinners in New York. It's quite a different scene in America. We found the sort of networking vibe is very different to over here, and that there are some cultural differences that mean it's not, you can't just copy and paste and go over there, and you've got to be ready to commit the resource to it. I think particularly the time to build it up, because it's kind of starting from scratch. So we're going slowly, but we certainly, the vision for us is to expand as much as we can whilst not compromising the experience. So we regularly get feedback from people that we're very London focused, which is absolutely the case at the minute, and that's where the kind of critical mass is. So we want to build these satellites around, and we'd love to be all over the place, but we've just got to temper the enthusiasm with our ability to deliver and not not kind of spread ourselves too thinly and end up not doing any of it well enough.
Yeah, well, I've certainly noticed any community needs ambassadors, right? I think, like you said, word of mouth's been key to you, and it's important that you get people that I think, well, we found that buy into the vision, and therefore a community has to be started with a place of wanting to do good and have a real purpose and drive to it for anybody to sort of want to get invested in that. And that's what we've seen kind of ignite in people and help it scale. But yeah, I mean, last question for me really is just around sort of anyone sort of listening on the call, if they've got, if you've got any strategies and tips, just thinking of maybe starting their own community or applying some sort of community marketing to their business development. What advice would you give them? Just go round. Go on, Jody. I know you're desperate to start.
I think, well, focus on something that you enjoy and focus on something that ultimately you have some experience of. I think, you know, ultimately that makes it very easy, because you can just look at it and think, right, well, what would benefit me in my role, and, you know, hopefully you can then find some commonality there with others doing the same thing, and then just keep asking questions, you know, whenever you get the opportunity. I mean, things like surveys can help, but really actually just having chats with people in a more sort of informal way will just throw up some great insights. So I think it's just find something you enjoy, you've got experience in, and just keep asking questions and keep talking to the community.
Yeah, I'd agree. Like I try and talk to at least five, like have proper conversations with at least 5 members every week, which is quite, I think, you know, there might be half an hour or an hour chats, quite a lot of time, nearly a day. I try and commit every week to just having those conversations and making sure that I stay close to people and understand how needs are changing. And, you know, talk as people are, for example, if they become more senior, we know that they have very different needs to someone who's a marketing, you know, a head of marketing director has very different needs to a marketing manager. So I think those conversations, staying close to that and making sure you're constantly thinking about the problems that you're trying to help people to solve for each other, because it's not your job. It's not my job to solve everyone's problems for them, but it is to create a space where that problem solving can happen between other people.
Yeah, so the listening part. Rich, anything to sort of add on that?
I think just going back to what I was talking about what community is, I think one thing that actually being part of the BD 100 and helping to shape it has got me thinking much more about is how shared attitudes and sort of common thinking is everything in my day-to-day of doing my own business development for the clients that I work with and my own pipeline. And I think real magic happens when you look for common thinking and common culture with individuals around you or groups. So that's why we were talking about the BD 100 is really a representation of what Jody and I are doing. It's a complete synergy with what we do day to day. So bring that, whether you start a community or just implement community thinking, think about making relationships and building business with people that you get on with, people that have shared interests, because I think that's how you'll have longer term client relationships, frankly.
Yeah, it's a great point, and certainly, you know, bringing people together like-minded is definitely going to help things, and I think we also don't always have to have the solutions. I think sometimes we think as if we're in the solutions business of whether it's agency world or just solving things, is that we often think, oh, we have to have the answer to every question. We don't, and we can't, and therefore I think a community is a very natural place to have those conversations and let those solutions naturally, you know, find their way out, you know, by themselves. And you can still be a part of that conversation without having to lead it. So no, look, that was all really helpful. You know, thank you. If anyone's we've got a couple more minutes. Anyone got any questions, you can sort of free to pop them in the chat, and we will answer them. But yeah, I think this is the last meetup or interview that we're doing of the year. So we'll be back online in January, where we're interviewing the Gate Worldwide and the AA, which should be a really interesting story about how they came together and their whole new brand campaign. And then we'll be back doing our regular sort of meetups and workshops each month. But yeah, thank you for joining us today. Thank you, Jody, Rich, and Tim, all really insightful. And have a great festive period, and we'll see you in the new year.